Mike and Teresa were absolutely clueless when they stumbled upon an ancient, small stone house nestled within the huge forest. Their attempts to research its origins online returned no results, as if this strange structure had never been seen by anyone before. Initially perplexed by their finding, their confusion quickly transformed into fear after looking into the house, a fear that was well-founded, and for good reason. What they found would be of more interest to the police than an amateur sleuth. Mesmerized by the strange sight before them, Mike and Teresa found themselves utterly confused. How could a miniature stone house have found its way to the heart of the forest? Its weathered appearance suggested it had stood there for decades. Cautiously, they inched closer, their steps slow and deliberate, ready to unravel the secrets held within its miniature walls. As they approached the stone house, an unusual sound reached their ears, distinctly foreign to the surrounding forest. Hastily, they realized the source emanated from within the structure. In an attempt to uncover the cause, Teresa used her mobile phone's flashlight to illuminate the interior of the house, delving into the mystery that lay hidden within. "Mike, you won't believe what I just discovered," Teresa exclaimed, her expression shifting while cautiously extending her hand into the miniature stone home, attempting to retrieve something hidden within. The mystery of what Teresa had stumbled upon inside the tiny house intrigued them both. How did it end up there, and why had no one noticed it until now? As seasoned hikers, there was little that caught Mike or Teresa off guard anymore. With 15 years of joint hiking experience under their belts, they possessed a level of expertise and self-assurance that allowed them to navigate any situation. Having encountered truly astonishing sights in the past and emerging unscathed, they had absolute confidence in their ability to handle whatever came their way. During their nature excursions, Mike and Teresa had encountered a wide variety of unexpected events, including encounters with homeless encampments and sights with wildlife in the most unconventional locations. On one occasion, they were prompted to involve the authorities due to suspicious behavior. Little did they know then that the strange thing they were about to stumble upon would surpass everything they had witnessed before. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Mike and Teresa prepared for yet another trek in the nearby preserve. Following their customary routine, they meticulously consulted their checklist to ensure they had all the essentials. Despite their numerous prior hikes in the region, there remained unexplored corners within the sprawling preserve. Unbeknownst to them, plenty of surprises lay in wait within the depths of the forest. With their sights set on exploring the heart of the forest, Mike and Teresa anticipated a journey that would consume the majority of daylight hours. Teresa calculated that they could make it to the focal point before retracing their steps. Although hiking the local preserve didn't initially ignite excitement within Mike, he believed it was well worth investing an afternoon. Little did they know their expedition was destined to deliver a far greater dose of adventure than they ever imagined. Jonathan, their dear friend, unexpectedly expressed an interest in joining Mike and Teresa to explore the heart of the forest, despite not being an avid outdoors enthusiast. Without any reason to suspect his motives, they warmly welcomed his presence. Little did they realize there was a hidden side to Jonathan, and he was good at hiding this part of his life. When Mike and Teresa reached the forest's edge to rendezvous with Jonathan, the weather appeared ideal for a late morning adventure. With clouds overhead but no rain, the absence of harsh sunlight prevented them from getting too hot as their hike began. However, the one drawback was the eerie shadow cast over the forest, which added a touch of unease as they ventured further into the dimly lit trees. Mike and Teresa, who were quite experienced, embarked on a challenging hike through the forest. They kept an eye on Jonathan, a less seasoned hiker, as he struggled on the steeper parts of the trail. Despite his difficulties, Jonathan displayed unwavering determination. However, as the afternoon wore on, Mike began to sense that something was amiss in the forest. They'd barely seen any wildlife all day. Mike felt silly for not noticing it earlier. Normally, the preserve was full of small game like rabbits and squirrels. Even if they didn't see them directly, there was always some noise in the background. But that day, there were only a few birds circling in the sky. The other unusual thing is that none of the trails seemed to match up with their maps. Teresa had one of her own, and when they compared the two, they matched. But the markings in the actual forest were different. None of them seemed to go to the center of the preserve. Were they lost? Teresa suggested that maybe they weren't allowed to be in that part of the preserve, but neither of them had ever seen signs stating that. They tried to pull up a satellite view on their phones, but there wasn't any service in the more remote regions. Instead, Jonathan chose a trail and mentioned that maybe they'd find something soon. Mike and Teresa followed. Mike and Teresa decided to follow Jonathan and continue going in the same direction as before. As they walked deeper into the trees, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. After all those years of hikers traveling the area, Why wasn't there a path worn through the grass and undergrowth? Finally, Teresa decided to pause and check their location again. She was able to get a weak signal on their tracker that indicated they were close to the center of the preserve. Happy that they'd been heading in the right direction after all, she didn't even stop to think about what they might find when they reached their final destination. When they arrived at the center of the forest, there was a surprising amount of open space with plenty of light streaming in through the canopy. Jonathan was visibly excited to get there and picked up the pace. But when Mike and Teresa stepped into the light, they realized that there was something else inside the clearing. Mike approached cautiously, wondering what he was seeing off in a shaded part of the field. He took a few steps closer and suddenly fell over, his foot tangled in something. Teresa hurried over to help him remove his boot and get free. When they looked up, Jonathan was gone. As Mike and Teresa searched for Jonathan, they noticed that there was a series of wires that seemed to go around the perimeter of the clearing. They were about shin height and looked like they were designed to make people trip. Feeling uneasy, they decided to follow the wires to see where they led. Up ahead, Mike realized that the structure he'd seen earlier was actually a small stone house. Based on the ivy, it looked like it had been there for decades. But why would anyone bother stringing wires around an abandoned home? Could the wires have been for a different purpose? Mike peered closer at the building. Maybe it wasn't abandoned at all. Suddenly, Jonathan emerged from the other side of the house. Like Mike and Teresa, he'd been trying to figure out what the wires were for. He showed them a part next to the house where there were even more wires at varying heights. Before they could figure out what to do next, they heard a bizarre noise coming from somewhere nearby. When they leaned closer, it almost sounded like ticking. The clearing made it difficult to find the source, but Teresa traced it to the back of the old house. It was clear that there was something or someone still inside. Mike was reluctant to go any closer in case it was a bomb, but Jonathan and Teresa couldn't resist their curiosity. Teresa found a short window on the ground floor where she could look inside. At first, all she could see was empty space. It was too dark to tell what was on the other side of the room. She took out her flashlight and held it up to the window for a better view. When she got some light into the house, Teresa saw that there was a small box hooked up to the wires. It didn't seem dangerous, and she just had to know why someone had put a device so far out in the middle of nowhere. Jonathan was eager to help her open the tiny window, and she slowly reeled it in by the wires running under the sill. Teresa turned the box over in her hand and almost gasped as she showed it to Mike and Jonathan. There was an antenna mounted on the opposite side, and red lights were blinking urgently. Mike thought it was some kind of alarm designed to trigger whenever anyone entered the clearing. Somebody knew they were there. Teresa felt like they weren't safe. She wanted to get out of the forest immediately. Jonathan and Mike weren't that scared. They felt a lot of adrenaline. They wanted to get to the bottom of this. What could this mean? Why was this house so important to someone to place a device like this in it? They had so many questions. Who knew that they were here? Then Jonathan suddenly spotted something in one of the trees. He did not see what it was at first, but he had to get closer. Teresa begged them to leave it alone and just return to where they came from. Why was this so important to Mike and Jonathan? Then Jonathan saw what it was. It was a camera attached to the tree. Now they certainly knew somebody knew they were there, and they could even see them as well. Teresa felt even more unsafe. This couldn't be good. Mike then changed in attitude as well. He didn't like the whole situation. Jonathan, however, wanted to get to the bottom of this. Would this be something he would regret later? This tiny house was certainly important to someone to keep an eye on it. Was there something else inside of it? Jonathan looked but couldn't find anything. The device was still blinking. It definitely triggered an alarm of some sort, and then it suddenly stopped. Teresa then heard something in the distance. She felt her heart stop for a moment. Who was approaching them? Teresa rushed to Mike and Jonathan, and she warned them someone was approaching. The two men were still investigating the tiny house. They couldn't find anything of value. When they heard from Teresa that somebody was approaching, they did not want to stay. They wanted to return later. Then they heard footsteps. Without any hesitation, the group made a run for it. They couldn't risk waiting for someone to approach them. What if they had bad intentions? Jonathan took the device with him. He wanted to find out what it was. They then heard someone shout in the distance. Teresa was now even more afraid. Who was coming after them? The device suddenly started making a sound again. Mike shouted to Jonathan to drop it. They could probably track the device. Jonathan was really stubborn. He did not want to get rid of it. Why was this so important to Jonathan that he couldn't leave it behind? Did he have a secret agenda? Suddenly, Teresa tripped over a branch, and Mike went back to help her. Jonathan, however, ran further. Mike shouted at him, but he wouldn't listen. He definitely had a plan of his own. Then Mike and Teresa heard dogs barking. They felt like they had to get out of there. What did they get themselves into? They definitely had not experienced anything like this ever before. They still had so many questions. But their priority was to get out of the forest without getting harmed by what was chasing them. They felt like somebody was getting close. The barking was getting louder as well. The dogs were tracking them. Teresa felt like somebody was watching them from a distance. She couldn't shake the feeling. Teresa hurt herself and couldn't run any further. Maybe it was best for them to see who was actually tracking them, and why. Maybe it wasn't so bad after all. Mike hesitated but decided to agree with Teresa's plan. The dogs were now really close, they couldn't outrun them anyway. Mike and Teresa were a little scared, and then they saw two German shepherds getting closer to them. Why was this dog following them? Mike got in front of Teresa. He wouldn't let anyone or anything hurt his wife. She was way too important for him. Then suddenly the dog was called off and a man approached them. Who was this mysterious man? It did not appear like this man had any bad intentions for them. Why was he after them? It looked like he had a tracking device in his hand. This must be how he followed them in the first place. But they did not have the device on them anymore. The dog must have picked up their scent from the tiny house. Then the man came closer. The man asked them what they were doing there. Mike was relieved that he would just talk to them. He instantly felt a lot less scared and more relieved than anything. Apparently, the man's name was Peter and he was the local forest ranger. Peter was investigating why there was a device active in this part of the forest, and he started asking a lot of questions. Teresa and Mike explained their reason for being here. They just stumbled upon the tiny house, and they did not have any intentions. Peter wanted to know where the device was that was inside the tiny house. It did seem really important to him. Why did he want to know it? Was there something more that Mike and Teresa did not know of? They told Peter that Jonathan had taken the device with him. Peter saw on his tracking device that Jonathan was already close to the forest edge again. There was no way he or his dog could catch up to him. He invited Mike and Teresa to his cabin in the woods to explain everything. Peter told them that the tiny house was under surveillance. The exact reason he did not want to tell to them. The tiny house was a remnant of an amusement park that was closed years ago. As a ranger, it felt it was his duty to protect it. The device was a tracking device that he left there by accident the last time he visited. It was pretty costly, so he wanted to get it back. What else was going on with the device and the house? They felt Peter did not tell them the entire truth. Their feeling was correct. Jonathan was still missing. He had the device and thought he had found something extremely special. Teresa tried to call Jonathan to tell him what was going on, but he did not answer. It went straight to voicemail. They knew that Jonathan was really stubborn, so Peter asked if he could accompany them to explain the whole story to Jonathan. The group went back to the forest edge. They did not see any sign of Jonathan, but he must be here somewhere. Mike was a bit frustrated with how Jonathan handled the entire situation. He just left them in the middle of the forest and did let anything know afterward. Then they heard a voice in the distance. Jonathan approached them out of nowhere. He seemed glad that everyone was unharmed. He did not seem to have the device on him. Peter immediately asked him where the device was, but Jonathan did not seem intimidated by Peter. He did not want to give the location of the device up. Why was this so important to Jonathan? Finally, that evening, Peter started telling the entire story, explaining that the house was under surveillance because of a rare species of bird that was sighted there. Peter thought that he had made the discovery of his life and wanted to get to the bottom of what he had seen. He did not want anyone else claiming his discovery, which is why he left the device behind. He later decided to call the authorities to find the proper legal way of dealing with this discovery. Jonathan seemed a bit disappointed. He thought he had found something completely different. He then gave up the location where he had hidden the tracking device. He felt sorry for leaving Mike and Teresa behind in the forest. Together they made a deal that they would leave Peter alone to claim his discovery. Eventually they saw in the newspaper that Peter had made his discovery and that he thanked them for helping him.